I didn't get suspended for arguing with my CEO. I got suspended for agreeing with him. That's the part nobody believes when I tell this story. But when you work in a company where the top floor feels like another universe, where the CEO only comes down in a quiet elevator, flanked by people who take notes just because he breathes, you stop expecting fairness. You stop expecting logic. You stop expecting anything except the next order dropped on your desk like a stone. So here's my confession, the one I never said out loud at work. I knew things were bad long before they broke. I just didn't know the breaking point would be me. My name doesn't matter. My role barely matters. Mid-level in compliance. One of those people who actually reads the documents everyone else signs blindly. The guy who highlights clauses, sends emails with subject lines like potential exposure if implemented as written, and says the word risk so often it loses its shape. It's boring work unless you care about consequences. I do. Or did. 3 weeks before everything fell apart, the CEO announced a strategic realignment. In corporate language, that means nothing good. Rumors spread through the cubicles like smoke. Layoffs, restructuring, new reporting chains, maybe outsourcing. But the real bomb came in the form of a glossy PDF labeled The Company Arrangement. Capital letters, gold branding, fake optimism. It looked like a standard operational restructuring. But by page 9, I felt the back of my neck warm, the way it does when I'm reading something that could ruin ordinary people's lives. And by page 12, it was clear. Responsibility for a risky new service line was being shifted downward, directly onto mid-level staff and contractors. Upper leadership, meanwhile, were getting financial protections and liability shields disguised as incentive adjustments. It wasn't just unethical, it was dangerous. My sign-off was required because compliance was supposed to be independent, not a decoration, not a rubber stamp. The CEO didn't see it that way. On a Thursday morning, that smelled like burnt office coffee and printer heat. I got an invitation from his assistant. Conference room 26B, 10 minutes. CEO would like to discuss your concerns. Discuss is a generous word. The room was all glass, the kind of glass that makes you feel like you're being displayed. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't ask me to sit. He just pointed at the chair like it belonged to him. You're holding up a critical initiative, he said. I told him calmly that the arrangement needed revisions. I explained the liability issues, the regulatory exposure, the unethical structure. I kept my voice even, professional. That's what my job required. He smiled the way surgeons smile before giving you the bad news. Sign the approval, he said. We'll fix the language later. Later meant never. Everyone in that building knew that. No, I said. That was it. One syllable. His smile twitched. You're misunderstanding your role. With respect, sir, I replied. You're misunderstanding it. He didn't yell. Powerful men rarely do. They slice instead of swing. Until you approve the arrangement, he said, leaning back, you're suspended. Effective immediately. No access to systems. No responsibilities. HR will follow up. I waited for anger to hit, for fear, for humiliation, but all I felt was air, like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't realize was suffocating me. All right, I said. His eyebrows twitched, just enough to show surprise. That was the first crack, though neither of us knew it then. He expected pleading, panic, bargaining, not acceptance. Leave your badge at security, he said, cold and final. I stood, walked out, and dropped my ID card into the plastic tray at the front desk. The guard tried to make eye contact. I didn't let him. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was already somewhere else in my mind. By the time I stepped onto the sidewalk, the wind felt different, clean, sharp. Suspension wasn't a punishment. It was permission. Permission to look at the email threads he thought I'd forget. Permission to check the compliance charter he assumed I'd never read. Permission to dig into the clauses that define my role as independent, not subordinate. Permission to realize that he didn't just push me, he crossed a line. And retaliation against an independent control function? That wasn't just wrong, it was a regulatory nightmare waiting to erupt. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even go home right away. I just walked, steady, calm, almost quiet inside, like a man who had finally found the shape of a decision he'd been avoiding for years. Because the CEO thought suspending me would break me. But it didn't. It clarified me. And as I crossed the street, hands in my pockets, my phone buzzed with an HR message full of sterile phrases. Administrative suspension, pending alignment, revisit upon compliance approval. I read it once, then I deleted it, because this story didn't start with a suspension. It started with one word, all right, and that was only the beginning. The first full day of suspension felt like being erased in slow motion. My badge stopped working before I even reached the parking garage. The security guard, one of the friendly ones who usually chatted about football, wouldn't meet my eyes as he escorted me to a side desk to turn in my laptop. He read from a printed script. They always read from scripts when they know something is wrong. Per HR directive, access revocation is standard procedure during administrative suspension. Personal items will be collected and delivered at a later date. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how utterly predictable it all was. When leadership wants someone silent, they don't punish you loudly. They smother you with process. They wrap you in neutral language and hope you suffocate quietly. I signed a form I didn't need to sign. He thanked me for my cooperation. I told him to have a good day. Walking out of the building without a laptop bag felt like walking out without a spine. But that was just the surface. The real pressure came fast. By noon, my inbox, what little I could still access from my personal phone, was filled with polite threats disguised as concern. From HR, we hope you'll use this time to reconsider your stance for the good of the organization. From a VP I barely knew, I strongly encourage you to align quickly. These initiatives have executive visibility. From a colleague trying to sound supportive, man, just sign it. Nobody's going to blame you. It's not worth fighting. Every message had the same shape. Give up, give in, everyone does. But underneath the noise was a quieter truth I hadn't fully faced. I had a mortgage. I had aging parents. I had obligations like any other adult desperately trying to stay afloat. In a world where salaries don't rise as fast as bills. Fear flickered in me, small but real. Maybe that's why I opened the company arrangement again that night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of stale coffee and a dull headache. I wanted to make sure I wasn't being dramatic, wasn't reading too much into it. I wanted to see if maybe, just maybe, they were right and I was wrong. But the more I read, the worse it looked. Page 12 alone was enough to sink careers. It shifted liability for compliance failures onto teams who had neither the authority nor the tools to prevent them. If things went sideways, junior managers would be blamed, not the executives who designed the flawed system. Page 15 promised leadership performance-based protections. Corporate poetry for we get the bonuses, you get the lawsuits. And the final section outlined reporting structures so intentionally vague, they might as well have been written in fog. My signature wasn't a formality. It was a weapon they wanted me to hand them voluntarily. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. Exhaustion hit hard, not physical but moral, the kind that makes your chest feel tight. I wasn't just refusing to sign. I was refusing to become the person who would. And yet, fear still lingered. Because what if I was alone in this? What if nobody cared? What if by trying to protect people, I just ended up destroying my own life? I closed the document and stared at the dark window, watching my reflection blur into the night. Then I remembered something I had read years ago when I first joined the company, back when I still believed compliance was a shield, not a formality. I dug through my personal files until I found it. The Compliance Charter. A boring document. Dry. Full of legal phrasing, but Section 3.4 stood out. Compliance sign-off is an independent function protected from undue influence, coercion, or retaliation. Any attempt to pressure or penalize an employee for their independent judgment must be escalated to the audit committee. Undue influence, coercion, retaliation. Suspension for not signing wasn't just unethical. It was a direct violation of the company's own governance structure, and not just internally, externally too. Certain industries had regulators who cared deeply about independence, too deeply for a CEO to play games with it. I wasn't powerless, he wasn't untouchable. The thought didn't bring triumph, just clarity. I understood what he had done. I understood what it meant. And I understood what would happen if someone, anyone, pulled on this thread. My phone buzzed. A message from HR. We trust you will soon recognize the alignment benefits of the arrangement. I stared at the sentence. Alignment benefits. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or throw the phone across the room. Instead, I replied with one word. Received. They didn't deserve anything more. I placed the phone face down and took a breath. Because I knew something now. Something the CEO had never considered when he suspended me. He thought taking my access away would weaken me. But it freed me. It freed me from the firewall that monitored internal emails. It freed me from the systems he controlled. It freed me from the intimidation built into the office walls. He thought isolating me would silence me. But isolation has a strange effect when you're already at the breaking point. It sharpens you. And as I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, the compliance charter open in front of me, one thought slid into place with perfect, inevitable weight. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the part where the story changed direction. That night, I stopped being the responsible guy waiting for permission, and I started being something else entirely. The first thing I learned during suspension was this. When a powerful man thinks he's already beaten you, he stops watching you. The CEO assumed I was home pacing, worrying, rehearsing apologies. HR assumed I was slowly softening. The VPs assumed I'd eventually cave because everyone caves. And that made the next part possible. I didn't rush. I didn't storm into anyone's office. I didn't send angry emails or write dramatic manifestos. I just started building a record. Every story like this has a moment where the ground shifts. For me, it came 3 days after suspension when I sat alone at the kitchen counter, sorting through old folders, both physical and digital. My house was quiet in a way the office never was. No keyboards, no chatter, no forced laughter from people who hated their jobs. Just me, my files, and the realization that the CEO had handed me the cleanest case of retaliation I'd ever seen. I organized everything with the same precision that annoyed coworkers during audits. The internal emails where I raised concerns about the arrangement, the read receipts showing they'd been opened and ignored, the flagged risk memos buried in subfolders, the unanswered request for clarification from legal, the CEO's meeting invite with the subject line, urgent, compliance, sign-off, required. The suspension notice timed exactly 2 hours after my final refusal. Everything fit together too neatly, like someone had written a textbook example of what not to do. And then there was the arrangement itself. I printed the sections most likely to get regulators interested, highlighted the parts that shifted liability downward, circled every place leadership protected itself while exposing everyone else. I wasn't preparing a rebellion. I was preparing a report. Late that night, I opened the company's official whistleblower portal. Not the HR one, the real one. The one buried behind 3 authentication steps, governed by the audit committee, not management. Nobody used it unless something was serious. I drafted a statement that was calm, factual, and lethal in its simplicity. I attached documents. I answered every prompt with dates and specifics. At the end, I clicked submit and watched the confirmation code appear. And that was when the second decision clicked into place. The regulator. Our industry wasn't fully government-run, but it was close enough. Anything that smelled like retaliatory pressure on a compliance function was something they took seriously, more seriously than CEOs liked admitting. I found the right form on their website, filled it out, attached the same documentation, clicked submit. No drama, no theatrics, just procedure. After that, the waiting began. But I didn't sit idly. I prepared for the counterattack because I knew he would fight back the moment he realized what I'd done. Men like him don't accept consequences. They negotiate them, bury them, outsource them. Still, he didn't see it coming. The board meeting was approaching. The quarterly investor call was 8 days away. The CEO was expecting to present the company arrangement as a triumph. Streamlining, efficiency, innovation. He had no idea the ground under him was already cracking. The first tremor came on a Wednesday morning. My phone rang from an unknown number. When I answered, the voice on the other end wasn't HR. It wasn't management. It was the external counsel hired by the audit committee. He introduced himself professionally. Then he said the sentence that made the hair on my arms stand up. We've received a report referencing potential retaliation regarding a protected compliance function. We need to schedule a formal statement. I kept my voice steady. Of course. Is tomorrow acceptable? Yes. And for the record, nobody in senior management is aware we're contacting you. This communication is confidential. He didn't have to add why. If a management found out, they'd try to get ahead of it, spin it, bury it. But they couldn't. Not now. The next day, I sat across from 2 lawyers in a rented conference room downtown. One took notes. One listened with a stillness that made me think he'd done this many times. I told them everything, chronologically, without exaggeration, without bitterness, just facts. When I slid the printed pages of the arrangement across the table, the note-taker paused. His pen hung in the air for a second too long. That was the first sign they understood the scale. By the end, the listening lawyer nodded slowly. "This is extremely serious," he said. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the next tremor came fast. Friday morning, the internal investigation formally opened. Suddenly, the CEO's name was being whispered instead of spoken. People were called into private meetings. HR stopped sending me those cheerful threat messages. Then came the email. The company arrangement is temporarily paused pending further review. Temporarily. Of course. They always say temporarily when they mean indefinitely. That afternoon, my former director texted me, "What did you do?" "Everything is frozen," I didn't reply, because chaos wasn't the part I wanted. I wanted justice, and justice was getting closer. 3 days later, 2 days before the board meeting, I got a second call. This time from someone higher, the chair of the audit committee. "We'd like you to join a confidential session for clarification." Suspended employees don't get invited to board sessions, not unless something is very, very wrong. I walked into the room with a calm I couldn't explain. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt aligned again, like all the pressure that had built for months was suddenly directed through a single narrow channel. The chair asked questions. I answered. Executives sat still, watching me with the expression of people realizing they weren't dealing with a disgruntled employee. They were dealing with a witness. And that was the moment, right there, where everything shifted permanently. I saw it in their eyes. I heard it in the silence after my last sentence. I felt it in the way the general counsel closed her folder like she'd just decided something irreversible. The CEO wasn't untouchable. He was exposed. They dismissed me politely. I thanked them. I left the room without looking back. In the hallway, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Immediately." CEO, but I didn't reply. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I was exactly where I needed to be. The CEO didn't fall all at once. Men like him never do. They're too insulated, too adored by the people who depend on their power. They don't crumble. They erode. Quietly at first, then all at once when everyone around them realizes the tide has already moved past their feet. The first public sign came the morning of the board meeting. A memo circulated internally, short, sterile, stripped of emotion. Executive leadership will not be presenting the company arrangement. Further review is required. No explanation, no timeline, just absence. In the corporate world, absence is louder than any announcement. I wasn't in the room when the board confronted him, but I know how those conversations sound. They're never dramatic. No shouting, no speeches, just pointed questions that have only one acceptable answer. An answer the CEO couldn't give. By noon, he stopped emailing. By 3, his assistant canceled the investor prep call. By 5, half the leadership team was whispering behind glass walls. And then came the earthquake. The company sent out an all-hands email Monday at 7:58 a.m. Effective immediately, the CEO is stepping down to pursue other opportunities. That phrase, other opportunities, is corporate shorthand, for we pushed him out before the regulators could push harder. 2 of his closest allies were transitioned into advisory roles. Another VP was placed on administrative leave. HR's director suddenly retired. The company arrangement deleted from every shared drive, scrubbed from future agendas, officially terminated due to structural misalignment. Corporate poetry for it should never have existed. You'd think that moment would feel triumphant, like some cinematic justice. But it didn't. It felt quiet, still, precise, the way a room feels after someone finally stops shouting. 3 hours after the CEO's resignation went out, I received a calendar invite from HR, but not the same HR that had tried to pressure me. This one came from corporate governance and ethics, which is basically HR with actual teeth. The meeting room was bright, glass-walled, overlooking the city. I walked in expecting a formality, a reinstatement speech, a carefully worded apology. Instead, 3 people stood when I entered. Not sat, stood. A small gesture, but in corporate life, it's the difference between respect and routine. They thanked me for my cooperation. They acknowledged my report. They stated plainly that my suspension had been inappropriate. Then they offered me a choice. Option A, return to my previous position with strengthened independence, direct access to the audit committee, and written protection under the new governance guidelines. Option B, accept a compensation package and a neutral to positive reference, along with assistance finding a role elsewhere, if I preferred a fresh start. They expected me to choose A. Most people would have. A safer position, visible support, a kind of victory. But the idea of returning, walking those same halls, hearing those same half-sincere greetings, sitting in meetings with people who told me to just sign it, made something in me go cold. I didn't want safety, I wanted distance. I'll take option B, I said. They blinked, all 3. Not in disapproval, in surprise. Are you certain? The governance director asked. Yes. Because the truth was simple. I didn't want to rebuild myself in the same place where I had been broken. I collected the final documents 2 days later, signed my name once, slid the folder back across the table. No ceremony, no feelings, just closure. Then I walked out of the building for the last time. Badge already deactivated, hands empty, air crisp against my face. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like freedom. Life after a storm is strange, quieter than you expect, almost suspiciously so. At first I kept waiting for something, a regret, a pang of doubt, a moment where I wondered if I'd made the wrong choice. It never came. Instead, my days filled with ordinary things I hadn't noticed I'd been missing. Cooking without checking emails, waking up without a knot in my stomach, reading something that wasn't compliance-related, thinking thoughts that didn't have to fit in bullet points. For a while, I did nothing except exist. It felt almost decadent. Then slowly, the world tilted back into place. An industry colleague reached out. They'd heard, somehow these things always leak, that I'd stood up to my leadership and remained intact. Their company needed someone with a spine in its governance team. We had coffee. They made an offer. I accepted. Not because I needed revenge, not because I needed a title, but because the work felt clean. Straightforward, honest, and that was enough. Months passed before I heard anything about the old CEO. Someone mentioned he was consulting now. That was predictable. Failed executives don't disappear, they rebrand. But the shine was gone. His name didn't carry the weight it once did. Doors that used to open automatically now hesitated. People who once praised him now avoided bringing him up at all. That's the thing about power. It looks absolute until the moment it cracks. Then everyone pretends they never believed in it. One evening, as I sat on my apartment balcony with a cold drink and the dull hum of the city below, I thought about him. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with distance. He suspended me to force my approval. I said, "All right." And that one word cost him his entire kingdom. Funny how that works. My life now isn't dramatic. It isn't glamorous. It isn't the kind of story people write articles about, but it fits me. I wake up at a normal hour. I drink my coffee the way I like it. I work with people who listen when I raise a concern. I go home without carrying a storm inside me. Peace isn't the reward. It's the consequence of refusing to become someone you're not. And if there's anything I learned from all of this, it's that integrity doesn't roar. It whispers. It persists. It survives pressure better than power does. The CEO tried to break me with suspension. Instead, he freed me. And everything that came after, the collapse, the exposure, the quiet justice, happened because I finally understood one simple truth. Nothing in that company was worth the cost of losing myself. Not the salary, not the title, not the fear. So I gave up all of it, and somehow that was the moment I gained everything back.